Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Breaking the Game podcast. I am one of your hosts, Stephen Gillespie, and joining me for the first time in what seems like forever is the regular co-host here, Austin Carr. Austin, how's it going, man?
Oh, it's good, man. I'm happy to be back at it. It was nice to have a little break, but I was definitely missing the show. Happy everything worked out for you. I'm glad everything's going okay. How you been?
Oh man, I could write a book on how my move went across country. It was
Sure.
pretty eventful. For anyone who doesn't know, started out in Washington State, and now we are back in Georgia, which is where we were about a year ago to the date. So,
Oh man,
it's just been the typical. It was like a family vacation. You know, the movies that you see, it felt just like that. So,
I'm sure.
Like I said, we can write a book about it and. Probably
we struggle with a road trip. I can't imagine moving across country.
Yeah, and we got 3 kids, and my wife is like in the 3rd trimester right now of pregnancy number 5. So it's been fun to say the least. But
sure.
Glad to be back here on the show. Glad to be talking NBA. I'm sorry that I have been absent for probably the most important part of the NBA season, but
it's all right. Life happens. We'll get back into it. It's no big deal.
That's right. And we still got a lot of NBA finals ahead of us. And luckily for both of us, I have been paying attention, even though I haven't really been able to be on shows. But, been plugged in. We don't have to talk about the Clippers losing or anything like that. That was pretty sore for me. But
it's okay. We don't have to talk about Boston
Celtics,
either.
Yeah, we were both high on Boston.
Yeah.
But, I figure Miami probably matched up against the Lakers a little bit better due to Bam Adebayo. But,
yeah.
So far, it's not looking that way. Do you want to go ahead and lead us into how game 1
I'll go
went?
ahead and get started with this. I mean, you guys know I'm a pretty big Lakers fan, so I'll try not to be too much of a homer on all this.
You're the only one that's got a dog in the fight left, man. So
right. Game 1 went about as good as it possibly could if you were rooting for the Lakers, and probably about as bad as it possibly could if you're rooting for the Heat. Everybody that's been watching knows Miami lost Bam and Goran Dragic to injuries. Anybody that's never had to deal with plantar fasciitis or having a plantar tear, I actually had that exact same injury 7 or 8 years ago, and I was in a walking boot for almost 3 months. So it's definitely not a fun thing to try to play through if he does. So definitely don't expect to see him anymore. Bam might be back, but even before they went out, the Lakers were kind of starting to pull away. I'll tell you what, the first 5 or 6 minutes of the game, it was pretty rough. If you were, like for me at least, the Heat were hitting all their shots. They were looking good. From that point on, the Lakers just kind of took over. It was pretty obvious that their size and athleticism advantage is going to be hard for Miami to overcome. The zone will help with that some that Miami's been running. If you haven't been watching, Miami's been kind of using a zone defense for pretty much all of the playoffs, off and on. But a little bit of stats for the game. Let me get my notes are on the wrong page. 1 sec. There we go. LeBron had 25 points, 13 rebounds, 9 assists. Anthony Davis was the leading scorer with 34 and 9. KCP, Danny Green, and Alex Caruso were all in double figures for the Lakers with 13, 11, and 10, respectively. Jimmy Butler did have a good game. He scored 23 points, but he only had 7 in the second half. Honestly, most of the second half of the game was out of reach. The final score was 116-98, but I feel like it wasn't even that close. About halfway through the third quarter, the Lakers were up by 32 points, and it was just a beat down from that point on. The other scorers in double figures for the Heat were Tyler Hero with 14. Kendrick Nunn came out of nowhere, hasn't played for a while, had 18 points, and took over for Dragic when he got hurt. And Jay Crowder hit 4 threes and had 12. Adebayo only played 21 minutes before he had his neck injury. Goran Dragic only played 15 before his foot injury. Jimmy Butler rolled his ankle twice. So, they got pretty beat up. And like I said before, their lack of size and athleticism beyond Bam, they have Kelly Olynyk to put in there after him, and he's not going to be able to keep up with Anthony Davis, Dwight Howard, JaVale McGee. The Lakers out-rebounded Miami 62-40. That's a huge advantage. The Lakers actually made 4 more threes than Miami. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the threes in game 2 after this, too. It was pretty interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the Lakers made 25 out of 27 free throws. That's something that's kind of been a bad thing for them in the playoffs so far, they've struggled from the line, but they shot really well from there in the game one. Miami was 11 of 14, so not too bad either. The Lakers had 3 more assists. Miami turned the ball over 4 less times than LA. Miami actually won the points in the paint difference, 46-38. They won the fast break points, 12-10. They won the points off turnovers, 16-14. And the Lakers were called for 4 more fouls than Miami. So if you were just looking at this, it almost, you could make the case that if you didn't know the score or watch any of the game, that Miami almost looks like on paper like they outplayed the Lakers. But obviously, if you watch the game, that was not the case at all.
So you were going over what I like to call the winning stats. You know, people who are familiar with the show know that I use that phraseology quite a bit, because when you look at, the points in the paint, the turnover differential, fast break, and the foul situation and the free throws, right? Like you talked about how that was almost uncharacteristic of the Lakers. And my guy, Jeff Hunt, who's a part of the Off the Ball Network with me, made the statement that Finals LeBron is a different type of human, which, amen to that. Like, it's almost like he kind of takes it easy a little bit. And I'm not trying to stir the pot here and draw a lot of LeBron hate or anything like that, but he does very much so ramp it up in the playoffs. And the Lakers did turn it around, and even game 2, we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But, the free throws and the 3 points and the turnovers were all things that we had looked at throughout the duration of the playoffs. And it was something that, we constantly criticized them and the Bucks for. The thing is that the Lakers have the best player in the NBA right now, and LeBron James on their team, and arguably another top 5 talent in Anthony Davis, whereas anybody else that the Lakers are going to go up against don't have that caliber of player that they're going up against. So you can't count on someone just to be able to ramp it up. Someone that someone like LeBron James has been able to do throughout the duration of his, entire career.
Right. Yeah, you make a good point about them both being top 5 talents. Obviously, I'm in agreement with you. I still think LeBron's the best player in the world, and I don't think it's particularly that close. And, all throughout these playoffs, the Heat have played good teams. They swept their first 2 series. They beat Boston, who we both were really high on, but they didn't play anybody they didn't really play anybody that was a top 5 talent other than Giannis, and he got hurt.
Correct.
And so they haven't really had to go up against this kind of opposition. And, what you said about Anthony Davis, I mean, he's scoring over 30 points a game in the finals. He's been on fire. I'd like to see him rebound a little bit more, but that's what Dwight Howard and McGee are out there for.
And LeBron.
And LeBron, obviously, he gets a lot of rebounds too. In the first half of that game, the Lakers went 11 of 17 from 3. They were the 23rd best 3-point shooting team in the NBA this season. So that kind of did come out of nowhere.
Correct.
And that's kind of the crazy thing to me is they're winning. They won game 1 at least doing things they don't normally do well, and not really doing the things they do well as good as normal. They didn't really score that much in the paint, which they were the number 1 scoring team in the paint this year by quite a bit. And they have been in the playoffs by quite a bit. The others, like Shaq and I like to call them, mostly Shaq, but I stole it from him. But, they all made plenty of shots. They were hitting their threes when they had to take them. Alex Caruso has been terrific on defense and offense. He's just kind of in there. He looks like he doesn't belong, and then he gets in there and kind of plays great defense on whoever you put him on. He disrupts things. He's just kind of a pest. And just about once a game, seems like he gets a big dunk and, kind of gets the momentum going back in the Lakers' favor. And I think at least the bench reaction, because there's no fans in the stands, obviously, but I think the bench reaction is pretty awesome every time that happens. So,
sure.
The Lakers went from looking like a team that was built around 2 guys that didn't really have enough, complementary pieces and no shooting, to a team that looks like they're loaded and deep. And throughout this playoff run, we've seen that they can kind of play any brand of basketball any way they want, and they're still going to excel. And, you can say what you want about the last series. They were Anthony Davis shot away from being down 2-1 in that series. They had a couple close games, but in all reality, they've pretty much dominated everybody that they've played up to this point. Going 4-1, 3 straight series like that is no small feat in the playoffs.
Correct.
Regardless of if you have to travel to their court or not. I think that makes some difference, but I don't think it makes that big of a difference. So, it's been impressive to see how everything's gone for them so far. And I just think any doubt that LeBron was still, the best in the world has kind of been put to rest at this point. He didn't really play his best game in game one, and that's kind of crazy to say because he was an assist away from a triple-double. But, that's kind of become commonplace for him.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of comments, especially like on my own thread. I'm friends with a lot of NBA, fans. If that's probably hard for you get to imagine out there if you're watching or listening now. But I do talk a lot of NBA basketball, and a couple of my buddies made the point that LeBron quietly almost had a triple double, which it did feel that way because with AD, you talked about how great he's been lately. His numbers, like what you see on paper, is exactly what you see when you're watching him play. It's very upfront. It's very, obvious that he is dominating the game. With LeBron, you go back and look at the game stats and you watch the film. It's just like, wow, he really did have that many points per game. It's just that he's consistent throughout the duration of the game, whereas Anthony Davis will go on runs where it's just like, man, like this dude is just eating them alive. And you brought up that Miami zone that we keep seeing. That's because they don't have when you have guys like Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson out there, these guys are not man-to-man defenders, right? And then especially putting out a Kelly Olynyk instead of a Bam Adebayo, that's the best thing that you can do is dare the Lakers to shoot. And right now they're capitalizing on that, right? So my buddy Steven keeps pinging in on here. It's crazy that he every time I talk basketball, my buddy Steven comes on here and wants to talk about the Clippers because I guess he thought he knew I was really high on the Clippers, but I can take it. Buddy Steven asked, Steven, would Kawhi or Giannis be a better fit on this Heat team? We don't got to spend a lot of time on this. I think Kawhi would because I think that Giannis would kind of gunk up the flow of the game a little bit. I think that Kawhi, his defense, he's almost like a same type of player as a Jimmy Butler, and having those two type of guys really wouldn't be a bad thing.
Yeah, I think you could definitely match up two wing players like that a little bit better with Bam than you could Giannis. So I'm kind of in agreement. Plus, I feel like Kawhi's game, he can kind of fit on just about any roster. He can do so much that I think, other than trying to be maybe the primary ball handler and playmaker on a team, I think he can do just about anything else at a pretty high level.
I'm going to touch on that here in a little bit.
And how I feel that's kind of one of the things that they do too much with Giannis. So
correct. But going into game two though, it was a 10-point victory, 124-114. Miami was without Bam and Goran Dragic, which, we talked about both of those guys getting hurt. Jimmy Butler did play, although he did roll his ankle twice in game one. So, he's not 100%. AD led the way for the Lakers. He was 32-14-1 with the steal, shot 75% from the floor, 100% from deep and the free throw line. LeBron James had another quiet 33-9-9 with the steal and a block. 56% from the floor, 37% from deep, and 40% from the line. Rondo, Kuzma, and KCP all kicked in double figures with 16 and 11 and 11 respectively. Jimmy Butler led the way for the Heat with 25, 13, 8, and 1 steal. He did only shoot 41% from the floor, missed his only 3-point attempt, but was 11 of 12 from the line. Kelly Olynyk stepped in offensively, at least. He had 24, 9, and 2, 56% from the field, 42% from deeps, and 60% from the line. Hero, Nunn, and Crowder all were in double figures with 17, 13, and 12. Here's where it gets a little bit crazy again in game two, much like it was for game one, right? Miami was 0.2% better from the floor than LA, but had 13 less makes on 26 fewer attempts. Let me say that again. They shot better from the floor than LA, but on 13 less makes on 26 fewer attempts. I don't know how you shoot 26 fewer attempts than any team, let alone in the finals, and expect to win.
Right. Miami, that offensive rebounds are just unreal in the Lakers' favor so far.
Exactly. And then Miami shot 6% from deep, or 6% better from deep, but had 5 fewer makes on 20 fewer attempts. 20 fewer 3-point attempts than the Lakers was Miami, and they led the NBA in 3-point shooting this year. Miami shot 33% better from the line and had 21 more makes on 17 more attempts. So that's really where they had the only big advantage they had in this game, which kept it kind of close going into the third quarter a little bit. And then both teams had 9 turnovers. The Lakers committed 3 more fouls, but they had 7 more rebounds plus 10 on the offensive glass, like you had just mentioned earlier there. 3 more assists, 2 more blocks, 4 more steals, and was plus 10 in points in the paint. What do you think about that, Austin, when you hear that?
It's another kind of a head scratcher a little bit in some of those team stats you read off. The fact that it was close again in points in the paint, and oh snap, it was close again in points in the paint. It was closer on rebounds in game 2, but still, a big Lakers advantage. The thing that surprised me the most was how well Kelly Olynyk played. He looked great. He had 24 points. He hit 3 threes. So, he filled in well for Bam on the offensive end. I think obviously where they miss Bam the most is going to be defensively and in terms of rebounding.
And having the ability to have the offense run through him on that elbow with the handoffs and the cuts that they use off him, almost like Nikola Jokic in a way, right?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. I didn't even think about that, but yeah. He was guarding LeBron a little bit in game 1, and I think honestly he kind of gave him some trouble. He's athletic enough to stay with him for the most part. He's big and strong. He can kind of meet LeBron at the rim and at least give him some trouble, make it a little difficult.
He can switch on the pick and roll too. So
right, and the zone is great, but most of the time, like you said, teams run a zone because they can't match up. Well, the Lakers are so big and they're so good at getting to the rim that if they tried to play a zone the whole game, they would get killed.
And you have the league's leader in assists this year on the Lakers right now. So
they've got, and Anthony Davis isn't a slouch either. He can pass a little bit. He can pass out of a double team. They'd put him or Dwight Howard at the high post, and they would just have a field day. But
even Howard was having a couple good looks. I mean, even if they didn't result in assists, he was making the right passes.
One other thing I wanted to kind of touch on in the Western Conference Finals when Frank Vogel went to Dwight Howard in the starting lineup. I think that was a great move. I think that's kind of instilled some energy and some life into them a little bit, because he's become like almost like the cheerleader for the team. You know what I mean? He's like the hype man. He comes in and everybody's energy kind of goes up. He uses his fouls wisely. He gets big rebounds. He plays great defense. He's kind of like the glue guy. He's kind of become a glue guy in a way for the Lakers, to use your term. Going forward in the series, I would like to see Bam and Goran come back, because, you always want to beat a team when they're at their best, and you don't want to hear people talk about, we lost because of injuries. I mean, there's injuries every year. The Warriors lost probably because of injuries last
season, right?
A couple years ago when Kawhi was still in San Antonio, they looked like they were going to give the Warriors a lot of trouble until he sprained his ankle. And, this has happened all throughout the history of basketball. Yeah, so I don't want to hear about Chris Paul. I don't want to hear about injuries being the reason this team, one team won and the other team lost, because it's just, that's part of the game. But I would like to see him come back. You don't ever wish injury on anybody. Tyler Hero, another one I wanted to kind of touch on a little bit. He set the record for most points by a rookie in a playoff game, I think, or tied it with 37. And then 2 games later, he broke the record for the worst plus minus in a playoff game ever. It was minus 35 in game 1. Yeah. And I watched the whole game 1. He didn't look like he was out there doing anything too bad. He didn't really, he wasn't like a glaring weakness or anything. So it was just kind of interesting to see those numbers and, how they, how rookies are. One game they look like they're going to set the world on fire, and the next game they're, look like a rookie.
Correct. Yeah. And you look at a stat like plus minus too, you got to be careful with that. That's really not an individual statistic, right? Like,
I know.
The whole team was basically minus 30 for that game, right? So like
Goran Dragic was the only one that actually had a plus, and he only played 15 minutes.
Yeah, and he the only reason he did so well was because he got hurt as far as that plus minus category, right? Because early we talked about how early Miami did have that lead, and then there was like that huge 30-point swing that we saw in the second, third quarter. And like I said, I think the entire Heat offense or the entire Heat rotation was minus 30 for that game or close to it.
I wanted to ask you something a little bit about, going forward in this series. If the Lakers do end up winning, as I think you and I both kind of expect, and just about everybody does at this point.
Yeah, and anybody who wants to be real, and I just want to touch on that just real quick, Austin. I'll let you get to your question. I think that we need to stop doing like this whole charity case thing for the Miami Heat. Like, can we just stop? Like, we know that they were a good team. Like, I had them beating the Bucks before the playoffs even started, and I had them giving the Celtics heck, but not beating them, right? So I get that they're a good team. Like, I knew that coming into it, obviously, but we can stop with the whole like rah-rah Heat thing against this Lakers team, because even with a fully healthy Heat team, the Lakers were going to win anyway. And now that two of their three best players are injured and their third player isn't even 100%, like they're not even talking about that. Jimmy Butler rolled his ankle twice in game one. Like, you're not going to be all right with that playing every other night. You're not going to be right playing on that ankle. So like all three of those dudes are hurt. And then Duncan Robinson and Tyler Hero have been effectively neutralized by the Los Angeles Lakers. We can stop with the whole like trying to build the Heat up, I guess, to help validate this Laker championship. Like, I still think it counts as a championship when they win. I'm not going to like discredit them or anything like that. But like, we don't have to try to like make the Heat out to be more than what they are. You know what I mean? Like,
right. Yeah, no, I agree completely. And I saw something on TV the other day that I definitely agreed with. Just about every superstar of every era that's won multiple championships has kind of had that one that was just a little bit easier than the rest. And
right.
This is kind of how that's shaped up to be for LeBron. They didn't have to play Milwaukee. They didn't have to play Boston, who everybody thought were the two best teams.
Or Toronto.
Or Toronto. They didn't have to play the Clippers, which, I think ultimately they would have beaten all those teams anyway. But, that's just how it falls sometimes, and
it's not the Lakers' fault that all those other teams lost.
Right. And to the people that want to say the NBA is scripted or the refs call games a certain way to try to influence who makes it to the finals, we wouldn't have this finals matchup if that was the case.
No.
We wouldn't have missed Clippers
not
versus Lakers
finals
if that was the case. We wouldn't have the Denver Nuggets in there. They're not exactly, a huge market with a rabid fan base. They've got great fans, but it's Denver. It's not, Chicago or LA or New York. The Knicks wouldn't be the worst team in the league for the last 20 years if that was the case.
I hate when people try to tell me as a basketball fan, like, oh, the NBA is much better. Like you mentioned the Knicks, like when the Knicks are a good team, it's better for the NBA. Like you don't have to tell me what's better for me. Like, I'm 30 years old. The Knicks haven't ever been that good in my lifetime. So, and I've been okay liking basketball. You know what I mean? So like, you don't have to tell me.
I think that's something that maybe, made sense 15 or 20 years ago before the league was as big as it is now.
Sure.
But, I mean, you can watch any team anywhere, anytime you want. Back when you had, one or two games on TV every week and you had to hope the team you liked was on there, it kind of probably shaped a lot of people's fandom, because that's who they could watch.
That's a good point.
And, now anybody can kind of watch any game whenever they want if they know where to look. So I agree with you. I don't really think that holds any water anymore either. Like, the finals were just as great last year with Toronto and Golden State as they've ever been with the Lakers and the Celtics, or any other big market team or marquee franchise.
And you could talk to me about like, this is the lowest rating finals ever. Like, I don't care. I'm still watching it. I'm still loving it. Like, I don't have a team.
Those numbers don't account for streaming either. And there's like, there's estimates of like 100 million streams at any given time. So, those numbers could be completely off. And TV isn't watched the same way it used to be, and the ratings don't really account for that. So, that's kind of the way the narrative gets pushed by people who want to act like the NBA's, in a bad place or whatever, because I just don't see it.
Neither do I.
But getting back to my question. So if the Lakers do win, who do you think so far deserves the finals MVP?
I'm glad that you asked this, because I was going to ask you this anyway. As of 2 games, I have Anthony Davis. Now, I think that the argument is very valid for LeBron James. But if you look at the statistics and the averages and things like that, Anthony Davis has been the more efficient player. He has led the team in offense. Now, you say 9 assists for LeBron James, and this is where it gets to be a close argument. Like, I think that the case could be made for either one of them. Right now, I have Anthony Davis. That's not to say that come game 3, my opinion won't change, and my buddy Will just said the same thing, AD for MVP. I agree, but like, you could get into a very detailed argument or, what have you for LeBron James. And I can't really it's not a snub. Whoever wins it, it's not a snub against the other one. It's just that the Lakers just so happen to have two really talented players.
Right. It's a great problem to have, isn't it? It's just
Yes,
kind of
sir.
the same issue they had when it was Shaq and Kobe, I agree with you. I think it's been Anthony Davis for one reason. And if you watch the games and don't look at any stats or box scores, who sticks out more? And so far, it's been Anthony Davis. He's had big moments. He's had big quarters. LeBron's just kind of been LeBron all the way through. He hasn't really had
just one of the best to ever do it.
Right. Yeah. He's like his baseline normal LeBron that we've come to be used to. And he just kind of quietly controls everything. And I saw something that really made me think, and it was really interesting the other day. It said LeBron's probably one of 2 or 3 superstars ever that can completely dominate a game while scoring 15 points.
Yeah.
Because he does everything else so well. He completely controls the pace of the game. Everything is kind of how he wants it to go. And I think, honestly, if he was really that worried about who was going to be finals MVP, he'd go out and drop 40 or 50 points if he really was that worried about it. I think he could, and I think he would. I don't think it matters to him. I think what he said about him and Anthony Davis not being jealous of each other is the truth. And, I'm sure that's hard to come by a lot of times in the NBA, especially with younger players. They think I got to be the guy on this team. And I just think that's overblown, and it doesn't really matter all that much. And I don't think it matters to him as much as people think it does. And I agree with you. I think just Anthony Davis has been, like you said, he's been so efficient. He has no holes in his game right now. So
none. Yeah, and I just want to say, to speak to a couple points you just brought up. One, I think you're kind of seeing what a lot of people wanted to happen with Golden State, which it did happen, right? When they started saying who's better between Kevin Durant and Steph Curry, that got to Kevin Durant. You know what I mean? Like that ate at him. Oh, yeah. And it led to an ugly split between them, right? Even though that we didn't really get to see everything that happened between the two of them, you kind of read between the lines with how he never once said that he wanted to be in Golden State. Never once said that he felt comfortable being on the team. He kind of snipped at reports and things like that and created fake accounts and so on and so forth. It's just, I think you're kind of seeing the same thing, especially with LeBron, as polarizing as he's been throughout his entire career. I think you're kind of seeing the same thing where people are wanting LeBron and Anthony Davis to split up. I think obviously that LeBron has a lot more legacy-wise on the line if he does not get this Finals MVP. So, obviously chasing Michael Jordan, if he's not ahead of him, depending on how you slice the bread, I really don't care to get into that conversation right now. Like, I have MJ over him right now, and that's not to say, oh, poor LeBron James, he's only the second best player to ever do it, right? It's just, I think people are trying to create these narratives that did successfully split up the Golden State Warriors. They're trying to do the same thing with LeBron and AD, and really the only one that you got to worry about leaving is Anthony Davis, because he has control of his future right now. And you're seeing all these reports just so happen to be at the same time. All these reports that, Chicago really wants to make a push to grab him now because it's where he's from. And now all of a sudden people are saying that LeBron, the only reason people want LeBron to win it is for legacy purposes over Anthony Davis. Right. So I think that there's a little bit of like ulterior motive and agenda behind
definitely
the narrative. And I really hope that the two superstars don't buy into that false narrative, and it doesn't look like they are.
Right. And I think ever since his first year with Miami when they lost to the Mavericks, I think LeBron's kind of put that whole thing just out of his head. He's been able to kind of compartmentalize, whatever else anybody else thinks doesn't really matter to him. Let the media say what they want. It's, at the end of the day, they're going to hate on him no matter what. He's arguably the most hated athlete in the history of sports, and it hasn't affected him yet. And I don't think it's going to now. And kind of the same with AD. I don't think AD's ever really seemed like a guy that worries a whole lot about what the media says about him. He's a little bit of a quieter guy, but you can tell when he talks in interviews now that he's extremely confident in himself. He seems happy playing with LeBron. I think they get along really well.
Most success he's ever enjoyed in his career.
Right.
I think that he's pretty happy to be playing where he's playing right now.
Right. And some people don't like their hometown. I mean, Chicago's probably a pretty cool place to be from, but some people like to get away from their home and all their friends and never want to look back. And sometimes it's best for those people. I mean, if everybody played where they were from, half the league would be on different teams than they are now. And
be on the Lakers.
Right. There's so many guys from California. It's crazy. And then which team do you go to if there's more than one team in your state? So it's just, that's a pipe dream. I think every fan base kind of hopes for, but I just don't know that it's realistic. The Bulls, I'm kind of excited to get to talking about them here in a minute, but that would be interesting to see. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on who you thought would be the finals MVP so far. I don't really have anything else.
No, I don't either. And we can go ahead and transition to the news. And since this is a guy that you're really big on, I'll let you go ahead and lead into the discussion.
For sure. We just mentioned the Bulls, and since we last were on here, they have hired Billy Donovan to be their next head coach. And as Steven said, I'm really high on this pickup, on this hiring. I think it's going to be great for the Bulls. I think Mark Eversley and Arturas Karnisovas, their new front office, are serious. They're going to really, turn the Bulls into a destination franchise like I feel like they should have been all along. Paxson and Foreman kind of for a long time made Chicago not a really nice destination for coaches or players really in general. Ever since the breaking up of the 98 Bulls, even though, that was Jerry Krause, ever since that point, the Bulls kind of have never seemed like, they were a real player on the stage, like they're sitting at the big boy table now kind of thing.
Except for the Derrick Rose and Jimmy Butler, Luol Deng.
I just meant more like they've never really been in serious contention to get big free agents, and they've kind of always gone after either first time coaches or long time assistants. Hoiberg, say what you want about him. I think he did a fairly good job with the Bulls. They just didn't have the talent at that point. And then now with Boylan, I think they did have the talent, and they do have the talent.
LeBron James's East too.
Right.
So
nobody
was eating. So
right. And they did have a few good years there with Derrick Rose, and he was, like we talked about, he was from Chicago and he was a hometown kid, and that was great, and it worked for him. And those were fun times if you were a Bulls fan, but realistically, they've never gotten anywhere near back to where they were, in the 90s. And not saying that they're going to become a dynasty or win multiple championships under Billy Donovan, but I think he's a proven winner. He's made the playoffs all 5 years that he's been a head coach, and he came into a great job in his first year that he had KD and Westbrook. And I think anybody would say, most coaches could make the playoffs with those teams. I don't really buy into that a whole lot. I think coaching really, really talented superstars is probably harder than just about anything, because it's a delicate balance of keeping control of the locker room, but also earning their respect. And, I think Billy Donovan's shown that he can coach superstars that are already established. He's obviously good at, developing talent. He was a great college coach. He never had a top 10 recruiting class, and he won, back-to-back national championships. So he's obviously gets a lot out of his players. And I think it kind of gives the Bulls some options here. They can try to go the rebuild route and try to develop the talent that they have on that roster now. They've got Markkanen, Kobe White, and I can't remember the big guy from Duke. What's his? Wendell Carter Jr. Sorry. They've got those three that are all lottery picks. Huh?
Don't forget my big guy out of Arkansas, Gafford, too.
Oh, yeah. They've got him. So, they've got good, talented young players all over the roster. I just don't think they've had the coach or the system in place to kind of develop them at all. Lauri Markkanen's taken steps back just about every year since his rookie year. And, I was really high on him coming out of college. He's a 7-footer that can really shoot. And I just don't think they've been used the right way. And I think Donovan's system, he can bring in a winning system right away and coach those guys up a little bit. Or this, the front office, I feel like probably sold him on a vision that they're going to try to make a run at some big free agents or make a big trade or something, because it's just, I know it's Chicago versus Oklahoma City. Those are two totally different worlds. and Chicago's probably a lot more attractive to a head coach. But he left Oklahoma City because he didn't want to go through a rebuild. And that's kind of what Chicago's going through right now. So that kind of tells me maybe that they're going to try to make some moves with the guys they have on this roster, or, package them with this high draft pick they have. So I think it gives them, multiple routes they could go to building a winner. And I just think, it legitimizes their intentions to do that.
Yeah, so I know that you're high on Billy Donovan. He was your choice for Coach of the Year, if I'm not mistaken, correct? Yeah, yes, so you're really high on him, right? I'm not as big as a believer on Billy Donovan, and I'm sorry to my buddy Jeff, who is hoping that you're correct. And he's a big time Bulls fan. I got a couple Bulls fans that I'm really close with. I'm really not trying to rain on y'all's parade or yours, Austin, right? Because like I said, I know you're a big fan. I'm just not that big of a believer in him, right? Like the reason we were told that OKC and him, mutually agreed to part ways, it wasn't a firing, right? Which we'll talk about a guy who was fired here in a little bit, but they mutually agreed. They had beers together. They reminisced on all these great times that they had and said, you know what, let's just kind of go our separate ways here. And that's real fine and dandy. But the reason we're told that was that the Thunder are going through a rebuild. Well, what are the Bulls going through right now? Like, to me, it seems like more of the same. We talk about how young the Chicago Bulls best player is right now in Zach LaVine. He's 25. Kobe White's 20. Wendell Carter Jr. is 21. Markkanen's 23. Gafford's 23. The Bulls also have the 4th pick in this year's draft, so that their overall age for the roster is about to be even lower. In OKC, the Thunder still have Chris Paul, right? Like, he's one of the elder statesmen in the NBA right now. He's probably not going to be there, but right now he's under contract. If he were to pick up that $40 million, dollar player option, which I don't see why he wouldn't. So, he's largely considered to be a trade piece, or, maybe even a buyout, which I don't understand why they would just buy him out. But anyway, he's, in his 30s. He's an elder statesman. They have Steven Adams. They have Dennis Schroeder. And if you're into young players, SGA is probably one of the more intriguing young players in the entire NBA. He can play the 1-2. We even seen him play a little bit of 3 in Oklahoma City. All these draft picks that they have, the Clippers just fired Doc Rivers, which, again, we're going to talk about here in a little bit. Is that the beginning of the collapse for the Clippers? If so, then those draft picks look pretty darn good for the Oklahoma City Thunder on top of the other ones that they have too, right? So I'm not really seeing a huge change in area other than the actual city, right? And then you talked about how successful he was as a head coach. Well, you coach Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, Victor Oladipo, PG-13, CP3, kind of underwhelmed with some of these teams too, right? So when you have you blew a 3-1 lead, that's apparently a big deal in the NBA nowadays, right? But
that's something that I'm going to kind of kill Doc Rivers for later, so I can't really, be too wishy-washy on that. So I will give you that. He has blown a 3-1 lead for sure. That's a red flag too.
Right. And then you see, I don't have this in my notes, but I was thinking about it when you were talking about marketing. How much better did Sabonis get when he left the Thunder, right? Like, he was just a stand in the corner 3-point shooter. He didn't develop. Like, what evidence are we led to believe that he has developed these young guys? You know what I mean? Like, young guys haven't really done well under Billy Donovan, and he has benefited from playing or coaching, all NBA MVP caliber players and run very isolation centric offenses. So I'm not really buying into the fact that he's going to go into this young team and do well. Like, you could point to this season and say, well, look at what he did with, all these superstars gone. He did have Chris Paul, who we all know is a great basketball mind. Will probably, if he chooses to be, probably will be a great NBA head coach because of how dominant of a floor general he is. I'm not buying into Billy Donovan being a great head coach. Does he deserve to be in the NBA? Sure. Like, I'm not saying he shouldn't hold a job, but I don't know why he was so highly valued and sought after, and why him, if you've seen players or coaches like Doc Rivers, Nate McMillan, they just flat out get fired. You know what I mean? And like, here he is having beers with his guy, Sam Presti, and riding off into the sunset saying, we just, it was almost like he was given the chance. Do you want to come back or do you want to go look somewhere else? Like, I just don't see what he has done, given the talent that he's had, given the lack of development in young players he's displayed, and how he's underachieved with such great talent. I don't understand like why he's given this special treatment compared to other coaches in the NBA.
Yeah, those are good points. And as far as underachieving, I mean, obviously this year's most recent season, I feel they definitely overachieved with the roster they had this year, at least compared to everybody's expectations. And the 3-1 lead, that was against the Warriors. That was against one of the best dynasties of our lifetime. So, that you kind of have to take with a grain of salt too. The fact that they were even up 3-1 to begin with, says a lot about that. But I don't know that was so much him as much as it was, Kevin Durant's one of the best 2 or 3 players in the world. And you'll have that when you have guys that good. But I just think for the Bulls situation, they needed somebody that's going to come in the locker room right away and be respected as the head coach. I think the players right away will, listen to him and take what he has to say to heart and really, buy in. At least from the get-go, from the jump, I think it'll be an upgrade from Boylan because all I've ever heard about that locker room is that he just had odd antics and he didn't really have the players' ear, and a lot of times that can be the big difference is just the players buying in, because everybody in the NBA, like we always say, everybody in the NBA is really good. Everybody can play. There's serious levels to this game and how good. How big the difference is from even being a college star to being a pro star. It's a night and day difference. You see guys come up all the time and become superstars from little schools that you've never heard of. Damian Lillard comes to mind. And so I think anybody can be good. Whether or not you can win championships is a different story. I think there's a reason there's only a few that have ever won more than one. But I just think, like I said, I think he legitimizes what they're trying to do. It shows that they want to build a winner. I think his knowledge of how to build a winning team and how to coach a winning team is going to help. They've been to the playoffs. Like I said, he's been to the playoffs 5 years in a row. And I think they kind of probably valued that experience over some of the other guys that they had been interviewing. I'm not too high on Ty Lue as a head coach, and I don't know if he was ever really an option for the Bulls. But there's Kenny Atkinson kind of came to mind as somebody that I was pretty high on.
Great choice.
I kind of
Kenny
think
the
so
Bull.
too.
I mean, it doesn't get any better than that.
Right.
Like, that's their mascot. So
yeah, and but from what I've heard in interviews, he comes off as kind of full of himself and arrogant. So who knows? Maybe he just doesn't interview well. But I kind of feel like to be successful at the top level of whatever profession you're in, you have to be a little bit full of yourself. Like they always say,
he's in the NBA. I mean, it's same. Players are like that, like coaches. If you get it to the NBA, there's only 30 jobs available, so it's even harder to get a coaching job in the NBA than it is to be a player in the NBA.
Right. And like they say something about players that make it to like the NBA or the NFL. They say like 3/4 of them on average are kind of psychopaths in a way that they think no matter who they're going up against, they're always going to be the best. That's kind of the mindset you have to have to make it. And I mean, the guys in the locker room will eat you alive if you don't have, if you're not confident in your game or confident in your abilities. So I don't really know why that was such a big issue, but apparently he didn't interview well. I've heard that from more than one team. So he's kind of taken a step back to the other, coaching candidates that are out there. And I just think Billy Donovan fits the situation. Like I said, if they are going to try to make a big move for a free agent or make a big trade, I think it definitely, gives them options here because he does kind of have experience with both types of rosters. So that was kind of a big aspect for me that I really liked. I don't think Billy Donovan's, the best coach in the NBA by any means, but I do think he's a good coach, and I think he'll at least be able to turn the Bulls into a perennial playoff team and someone that can actually compete.
Yeah, I mean, he could probably help. Like, it just kind of works like this in the NBA, right? Like when you have a young team like this and they get a chance to grow and develop together, and you bring in a somewhat competent head coach, especially in the Eastern Conference, the top half of the East is basically set, but he can get them in a position where they can compete for that 6th, 7th, 8th seed in the Eastern Conference. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I don't really have much else on that. I'm a lot more excited to talk about Doc Rivers than anything.
Oh, I cannot wait. I've been talking about Doc Rivers with so many people, and I feel like I should be an assistant coach under him whenever he starts in Philly.
Hey, I'll let you go ahead and take it away with this one.
Okay. I cannot for the life of me understand why all of the sudden Doc Rivers is viewed as this overrated head coach. Like, I get it that, I'm aware of the 3-1 leads that he's had in the playoffs. I'm aware of the fact that he hasn't made the Western Conference Finals in LA. I'm aware of the fact that his offenses aren't like super innovative or groundbreaking or anything like that. However, and even going back to the coach that we just talked about with Billy Donovan, I cannot for the life of me understand why the excuses that I hear for other NBA head coaches don't apply to Doc Rivers. Okay? Take Nick Nurse. His team was injured for most of the year, and he still made the second seed in the East. Doc had basically the same thing happen to him in the West, which is largely viewed as a tougher conference. Mm-hmm. And the Clippers, what seed were they this year, Austin?
2,
with a brand new roster, and they were injured for most of the year. They didn't get a chance to develop chemistry. Mm-hmm. And Nick Nurse is excused in the East, right? Did the Raptors make the Eastern Conference Finals?
Nope.
Okay. The Clippers didn't either, right?
Right.
Now, take Mike Budenholzer. High expectations, right? A lot of people had them winning it this year, right? Or at least making it out of the East, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. Same thing for the Clippers. They were a high seed, but they lost to a team that was viewed as inferior, although not by me. The Heat were viewed as inferior. What seed were the Heat coming in to the playoffs?
5.
They were the 5th seed. What seed were the Nuggets coming into the playoffs?
2.
They were the 3rd seed.
They were the 3rd
seed. Yep. So the 2 seed lost to the 3 seed, but the 1 seed lost to the 5th seed. How many? Mm-hmm. And the big thing is that they blew a 3-1 lead. They were up 3-1, right? How many games did the Bucks win against the Heat?
1.
They won 1 game. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now let's talk about your boy. Billy Donovan. Mm-hmm. He's blown a 3-1 lead, and he's being treated better upon his release from Oklahoma City than Doc did in LA. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, let's forget about the fact that he's had multiple MVPs and All-NBA team. Let's forget about that. Let's forget about that this is Doc's first year with a brand new roster. Let's forget about how Lou Williams had the lemon pepper incident, the great lemon pepper incident. Let's forget about how Montrezl Harrell was out at the beginning of the bubble after the hiatus, right? Let's forget about the fact that the Clippers don't have a legitimate ball handler. They don't have a create for others type player. All their players create for themselves. Let's forget about the fact that all their guys were injured and everything else. They still made the 2nd seed in the Western Conference. They lost to the Nuggets. I get that, right? I still just don't understand how all the hate that he's getting this year. I don't understand where it comes from. Like, I get the fact that they lost to Houston, and didn't make the Western Conference Finals. That same Houston was a Chris Paul injury away from beating the Golden State Warriors, right?
Right.
Okay. There's only been 5 teams to win a ring in the past decade. Those teams have either been super teams, and I'm talking about Miami and Golden State. Mm-hmm. They either have that, or they have, one of the best NBA head coaches to ever coach in the NBA and Greg Popovich, or they have, the best or second best player in the entire history of the NBA, and LeBron James talking about Miami and Cleveland. Before this decade, who was one of the most recent head coaches to win before all that happened? Doc Rivers. Mm-hmm. He is an NBA level. He is an NBA champion head coach, and I don't understand why all of a sudden he's overrated. And if you don't want to talk about history or his championships, okay, let's talk about current NBA head coaches. Right now, I have Nick Nurse, Brad Stevens, and Eric Spoelstra as surefire guys that I would take ahead of him, right? Would you agree with those 3?
I would, yes, definitely.
Okay. You can make a case for Greg Popovich currently, too, because he's got a young team. We've seen what he's done with some talent in San Antonio. You could throw Greg Popovich in there. I may be able to take Steve Kerr, even though he, almost anybody could have coached that team to a title, right? So outside of those 5, there is not another NBA. You could maybe talk about a guy like Quinn Snyder. Like, we're getting into like some maybes, like maybe far reaches. But outside of those 5, Doc Rivers has to be like the best guy available as an NBA head coach. So does it make a lot of sense for you to fire anywhere from 5th to 7th best NBA head coach and expect for things to get better?
Right.
Even when you're going to lose Montrezl Harrell this year because they don't have enough money to pay him. They don't have draft picks, nothing. Like, the expectations, I get it, were high. But again, he was dealt a pretty tough hand. And the only way I could justify the firing is if he said, if you get me Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, I will win you a championship. If he said that, sure. But I don't think he's an overrated NBA head coach. Now, if we're talking about him in Philly, I don't love that fit just because, not for the talent aspect or his coaching ability. It's just more of the same what we've been seeing with him. He's going to be dealt some very injury prone players. You know, he went from Blake and CP3 to Paul George and Kawhi, and now he's going to be dealt with, you know, Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. Those guys get injured pretty often as well. There's rumors about, you know, possibly moving on from Ben Simmons if you're going to move on from one. I actually agree with that one. And, you know, bringing in Alvin Gentry, that's going to help with the offense. You know, something that he's kind of criticized for is his, you know, offensive versatility, things like that. So you bring in Alvin Gentry, that helps. But I don't understand why he is viewed as this overrated NBA head coach. I get the bullet points, but he gets attacked for those more heavily than any other NBA head coach, and he's one of the most accomplished NBA head coaches currently in the NBA right now.
Right. You make a lot of good points, and you have a pretty good argument, and you've actually kind of made me think about some things that, you know, hadn't really considered before, and that's always fun. You know, you do make a good point when you compare him to other coaches, but you know, something I tell my employees at work is, you know, you can't base your performance and how you think you're doing off of the performance of your peers. Not really. It's about self-worth and about, you know, your own personal expectations and personal goals. And how many casual NBA fans that don't really watch, you know, they say they have a favorite team, but they don't really watch the games or keep up with it. How many of them you think can name Eric Spoelstra or Nick Nurse? Probably not a lot of them. I mean, they might be two of the more popular ones, but I'm talking like my wife. You know, she's not going to know who they are unless I, you know, ramble about them, which I probably have. But I feel like a lot of casual fans know who Doc Rivers is. I feel like he's in the spotlight a lot more than a lot of other coaches. I think he's in the media a lot more than other coaches. And my whole argument stems from the amount of talent that he has coached and the amount of times that they haven't gotten to where everyone thinks they should get to. Going all the way back to when he was in Orlando. Yeah, he won Coach of the Year in 99 and 2000 with them, and he did a pretty good coaching job there from the beginning. But, you know, he blew his first 3-1 lead in 2003 with the Magic, and, you know, he had a young prime Dwight Howard and didn't do, you know, all that great with him. And then, you know, with these Clippers teams, he's had.
Whoa, I'm sorry. Can you say that again? He didn't coach.
He didn't coach Dwight Howard. I don't have that wrong.
No, that was Stan Van Gundy, bro.
Stan Van Gundy. Okay, I wasn't sure about that as soon as I said it. I kind of thought that might be a mistake.
No, it's all right.
Anyway,
I know you can easily jumble notes and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, it's all kind of a mashup in my brain year to year. Give me one sec. Sorry.
You're fine, man.
Here we go. So I think Doc Rivers has probably coached the most talent ever in the NBA outside of maybe Phil Jackson and Pat Riley. Maybe Doc Rivers, Greg Popovich. But, you know, he's had 9 series losses in the playoffs in which he led either 2-1 or 3-1. He's the only coach that's ever lost a 3-1 lead 3 times. And, you know, he has won 1 NBA title. That Celtics team had 3 Hall of Famers, probably 4 when Rondo's all said and done. Sure. And they were loaded, and they were in, like you said, the weaker Eastern Conference. And I think they only made the finals twice, maybe 3 times. I mean, that's nothing to sneeze at. I mean, that is a good job, but I feel personally that if he was as good as everybody
used to, by the way.
Right. But, you know, that was kind of before he really took off and made the finals every year. When he went to Miami is kind of when that really started. But, you know, that one ring, that Celtics team lost more playoff games that year than any champion ever has. They went to 6 games twice. They went to 7 games twice. Yeah, they won, but it was far from dominating. And, you know, he had Kevin Garnett, who was arguably top 20, top 25 NBA player all time. You know, Paul Pierce is no slouch. Ray Allen's one of the best shooters ever. Rajon Rondo at that point, you know, was putting up.
They weren't all in their prime, though, would be my only thing to say.
They probably were getting towards the end of their prime and into maybe, you know, towards the end of their careers. And then if you go forward to when he first was the Clippers coach, they had Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan, Chris Paul, and, you know, they never
JJ Redick,
They had JJ Redick, they had Jamal Crawford, they've had Lou Williams for quite a few years, they've had Montrezl Harrell for his whole career. So, you know, he's had a lot of talent there and never even made it to the conference finals. The Clippers as an organization have never made the conference finals. And I just think if Philadelphia really wants to win a title with the team they have, they need to try something that maybe they haven't tried before, instead of going after another head coach that's been around the league forever, who, like you said, doesn't have the most innovative offensive system. Doc doesn't really kind of strike me as a guy to really light a fire under people too well either. He seems like a kind of a more laid back personality, and I don't know if that'll fit well with Embiid and Simmons if you want to try to get more out of those guys, because from everything you hear from fans and media and anybody else, those two guys kind of need a kick in the ass, so to speak, to kind of get going. They're not really. Jimmy Butler supposedly didn't want to stay there because they weren't as serious about winning as he was. And so I think that's where a lot of that comes from. I don't know if anybody's as serious about winning as Jimmy Butler. He's pretty locked in.
He's one of those psychopaths that we were talking about.
Exactly. Yeah. And, you know, Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid kind of seem more like Shaquille O'Neal. Like they have a lot of other interests. You know, basketball might not always be the most important thing to them. Yeah. And, you know, that's hard to be the best in the world and win a title if you don't have that mindset. And Doc doesn't strike me as the type of guy that's going to come in and, you know, restructure the way they do their whole offense and figure out a way to, you know, play Embiid and Simmons together and have it succeed.
Yeah.
Versus what Brett Brown did. He does run a lot more pick and roll, which I think will work with them. So that might work out. I just, you know, all throughout his career, he's kind of underachieved in terms of the roster that he's had. And like you said, does it make sense to fire the 5th or 6th best coach in the NBA and expect to get better? Maybe not right away. And I know their timetable is pretty short because I think Kawhi and PG can both become free agents after next year again.
And they need an ego manager, which is what Doc is. Doc is an ego manager. He's
right.
Not,
and I mean, but if that's what you're saying, if he's really that good at that, then why did they have so many chemistry problems this year? And you can say injuries. I know they had a ton of injuries, but it didn't seem like they even liked each other. You know? Like I heard that report about after the game when they lost that Paul George kind of made a speech to the locker room and everybody kind of rolled their eyes at him. It just seems like, you know, they don't really have a leader in the locker room, so to speak. And
I could buy that, but I mean,
I don't know how much blame you put on the head coach for that, but there's got to be some.
Like he's not gonna, and that's the thing. Like when you coach in the NBA, you're not coaching, you know. You're not coaching NCAA basketball where where the coach outlasts the players. Like you're in the NBA, it's the other way around. You know what I mean? Like when you get players aren't going to places and being like, you know what? I want you to tell me everything that I need to do. Like even LeBron James didn't want to do that. Remember what happened in Miami? He was like, Pat, I don't like this coach. You know, we need to change who the head coach is. And Pat's like, no, actually, Spoelstra's a really good head coach. We're not going to fire him. He said, all right, cool. I'm leaving.
Right.
Like that can happen to anybody. So if you're going to have an X's and O's head coach like Miami does, you're not going to land these super big time talented players and keep them. Like we saw what happened with LeBron. Even Wade left, you know, and I don't think that was because of Spoelstra, but, you know, they weren't competing the way that he expected. You know, he's one of the best to ever do it, one of the best shooting guards ever, and he wanted to go somewhere else and try to help legitimize his legacy. You know, it took them a long time to land a star, and the only star they landed was Jimmy Butler, who I view as a star, but not everybody does.
Right.
You know, he's almost kind of like that right just between that all-star and superstar is where he lives to most people. So, you know, if you're going to have an X's and O's guy, you're not really going to have a superstar unless you draft one a la Brad Stevens and Nick Nurse, right? So
right.
I don't know. Like, he is an ego manager, but his schemes did generate open looks for Paul George. He just couldn't capitalize. His schemes
I think ultimately
open looks for Lou Williams, couldn't capitalize.
I think ultimately, kind of putting your championship eggs in Paul George's basket is kind of a mistake in the first place. I've never been as big a fan of his as some people.
We're kind of retroactively seeing that,
Yeah. And, even when he was here with the Pacers, everybody every year acted like they were going to give the Heat this big, hard time and take him to 7 games. And they did play him pretty well. But to be totally honest, I think Roy Hibbert had as much to do with that as Paul George did. He never stepped up in the playoffs and became this leader superstar. Playoff P isn't really a real thing. It's just a joke.
It's not the one that he wants it to be anyway.
Right. And I just think, that's not his fault. Obviously, Doc Rivers was the president of the Clippers for a while, but he hasn't been for a few years. So it's not like he picked those guys. He doesn't make the roster. And I think that's going to kind of be one of the same problems in Philly is they have a pretty mismatched roster. We've talked about that on here before.
Correct.
He's not going to turn these guys into, 3-point shooters all of a sudden. He's not going to be able to change the way Horford and Tobias Harris play and space the court all of a sudden.
Josh,
you're right. They're going to have to do something with that roster.
He's got one of the most difficult jobs ahead of him, man, because they don't have they hardly have any draft picks. They don't have any money to land a free agent, and their trade assets aren't the sexiest unless they're willing to move on from an all NBA caliber Joel Embiid or an all defensive talent in Ben Simmons, So
right.
You got to move a valuable piece. And how often do we see a valuable piece get moved and that team get better? You know what I mean? So it's
right. Who has ever traded $1 for a handful of quarters and ended up being better right away? Hardly anybody ever. That doesn't really
hardly
happen.
Anybody.
You could say maybe for a time period there, the Knicks looked like they got robbed in that Carmelo Anthony trade. They gave up a lot for him, but that, I mean, none of those guys are going to be, the reason you win or lose a title. And
Oklahoma City may have a thing or two to say about this argument come a few seasons,
Right. And, I think they're obviously, the easiest ways to build a winner are either get a big free agent, or if you can't get a big free agent because you're in a bad market or you're in a small market or whatever, you try to make trades. And, Oklahoma City, like you said, they're positioned for the next 7 or 8 years to be able to make just about any trade they want.
I cannot wait to see what happens when it's all said and done.
I hope they do a little bit more with it than Danny Ainge has done so far in Boston. I don't think he's made a trade at the deadline in 5 years, even though he's got a war chest of picks there. But that's a different story for a different day.
Correct.
I don't want you to think I don't think Doc Rivers is a good coach, because I do. I do think he is a good coach. He belongs as an NBA head coach. I just think it doesn't make sense if you look at the rosters he's had, you could say playoffs wise, he's underachieved for the most part. He's 91 and 89 overall in the playoffs, and he's 943 and 681 in the regular season. So, his playoff win-loss record leaves a lot to be desired. And it's been a long time since he's made it to the finals. And like I said, he even struggled to get there with that team. And I feel like the 76ers have a roster that has underachieved in terms of their level of talent.
It's going to be so tough for Doc, man. So tough.
I think in the East, you've got to think Embiid and Simmons coming into this season. If they could figure it out, I could have seen them being the number 1 seed in the East, to be honest, before the start of the season.
I never was in love with the fit of the roster. I was never in love with it.
Yeah.
I didn't
understand why they went for Horford either. I kind of didn't think it made a whole lot of sense to replace Jimmy Butler with Al Horford and expect it to work. But, again, that's, out of the head coach's hands usually. I just don't see any world where you take a perennially underachieving coach and a roster that's underachieved up to this point, and for it to just magically click and all of a sudden they're a championship contender, when this year they couldn't even get out of the first round. Neither party has made it to a conference finals in a long time. I just think, why not try somebody like an assistant, like a Wes Unseld Jr. or a Ime Udoka or somebody like that? Or why not Kenny Atkinson?
Because Jay Wright said that he wasn't leaving to go coach Philly. That's why. Like, you know that they wanted to land him.
Oh yeah, I'm sure he's the first person they called, and he just, probably
he's like, nah, I'm okay. I'm okay.
Right. He's got a pretty good setup.
He's got a sweet gig going on.
And I guess I don't understand how guy like Kenny Atkinson has been on the market as long as he has, and a guy like Mark Jackson, who did a good job when he was in Golden State. People act like he didn't do anything with that roster.
Yeah,
and they were good. They had never been good in my lifetime, and they were good when he was their coach, and kind of just got them ready for Steve Kerr. I feel like a little bit, but I just think in terms of where Philly wants to be and where the Clippers want to be, there's a very, very fine line between really good coach and a championship level coach. And I just think at some point you've got to roll the dice and try something new. I didn't think the Clippers would fire him, but I didn't think they'd stand pat either. I think they had really high expectations for this year.
One more year due to the circumstances.
I was pretty surprised.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You're good. You're good.
I was just going to say, I also see why Philly went after, like I mentioned earlier, like the 5th to 7th best NBA head coach right now. Like, it makes sense. It's just, if I'm Philly, I do that. Sure. Like, I say, yeah, I'm going to grab a Doc Rivers. But if I'm Doc Rivers, I'm trying to figure out why I'm going there. I bet the Nets are almost kicking themselves for not, because like nobody saw this move coming. I would bet money that if Doc Rivers was available for the Nets, they would have signed him. I would be willing to bet money that Doc Rivers would be the Brooklyn Nets head coach.
And maybe so. And I kind of feel like that would have worked better for him and for Steve Nash if they were just flip-flopped. Because I don't know how well Steve Nash is going to be able to handle Kyrie Irving when he starts having a bad mood or he has a bad day and he says something to the media that pisses off everybody on his team, because it's probably going to happen at some point.
And that's a great transition to a new segment that you've brought to us. Go ahead and let you introduce your brainchild here.
I've been, kind of thinking about this stuff for a while since we haven't had a show for a couple of weeks. And, one of the things that people tend to love about the NBA, it's all good, that love about the NBA is just the kind of the side stories and the drama off the court. So I called this NBA gossip column just because some of this is kind of not based off of facts. It's more just what you hear here and there. It's more a little bit of just opinion,
or interviews and stuff like that.
Right. It's stuff that you can't really say for sure, but I think a lot of people are probably thinking a lot of these same things. So we've got 2 or 3 of them to go through today. The first one is the most recent one, and it's the one I'm most excited to talk about. It's the statements Kyrie Irving made to the media the other day. It was either right before or after game 1 of the NBA Finals. LeBron's in the finals again for the 10th time in his career. And all of a sudden, here pops up Kyrie Irving in the media again, saying that for his whole career up until this upcoming season, that he feels that he's been the best option in the clutch on his team. And then now he said, quote, "First time in my career, I can look down and say that MFer can make that shot too." It's pretty obvious that it was a shot at LeBron. And I just don't understand it in the least. I think Kyrie Irving is probably very jealous of LeBron James. I think that's a big part of the reason he wanted to leave in the first place. He was the number 1 overall pick. He was supposed to be the post-LeBron kind of savior of the Cavaliers, and he couldn't even make the playoffs by himself. Then he was supposed to make Boston take him from a team that went to the conference finals to a legitimate championship contender, and they didn't even get out of the second round. And by all accounts, he was not a good fit in the locker room. He's thrown his coaches under the bus. He's thrown his teammates under the bus. He's kind of just says whatever he wants in the moment. And I don't think really thinks about the ramifications of what he says a lot. And it's just also just patently false, the fact that he was the best option in the clutch. Yeah, he made one of the biggest shots in the finals in NBA history.
I mean, we can't say, yeah, he did. Like that was a big shot. Like that was a legacy saving shot for like just the one. I'm just going to say just that one.
Agreed.
Well, and Ray Allen. But
right. And everybody that's ever been in that situation that many times has had help. Nobody's done it. this idea that one guy carries another or carries a team is so stupid to me. Like, nobody's ever won 1-on-5. Nobody's ever played 1-on-5. You know, I'm sure LeBron James would tell you that every guy on his roster that he's ever played with is just as important as he is, just because that's the kind of guy he is. He may not really think that, but that's what he's going to say.
Well, that's why, typically speaking, LeBron James has always needed to be surrounded by shooters. Up until very recently, that's just the one little chink in his chain, you know?
Right. I mean? He's a little bit more Magic Johnson than he is Michael Jordan. And, you know, it's just kind of, for the most part, it's a lot sexier to score than it is to set up your teammates. So, you know, I think that's kind of one of the reasons he gets that knock so much. But I also kind of view LeBron in the same lens as like a Wilt Chamberlain, in that any given night he could go out and get whatever he wanted stats wise. Like, and I think he could do it still, even in year 17, he could still go out there and drop 50 anytime he wanted. I just think he knows that there's better ways to win, easier ways to win, and that's not going to work in the finals. So, and, you know, like I said, it's just kind of pick your flavor there. But in the time Kyrie and LeBron were teammates, LeBron actually shot better from the field and from three in clutch situations. So that's what I mean when I say it's just not true. You know, Kyrie Irving has hardly even proved that he can be the number one guy on a team that can even win a playoff series, let alone talking about being the best clutch shooter on every team he's ever been on. And just the timing of it, you know, it just shows that he's dying to be relevant. He wants to be in the media so bad. You know, I kind of didn't really like what he said about how if he was healthy, he wouldn't even be wanting to play in the bubble because it would take away from everything else they were trying to do in terms of social justice. That's really easy to say when you're not going to play anyway. It's really easy to say when you've already, you know, kind of cemented your position in the hierarchy of things in the NBA. You know, you don't have to worry about making a roster ever again. You're set for life financially. You know, that doesn't take into account a rookie that's, you know, at the end of the bench, or a guy that's going to be in the playoffs for the first time. You know, it's like I said, it's really easy to throw stones when you're not really able to play. It was, I think, he just seems like no matter what is going on, or no matter where he is or who's his teammates, he's either unhappy or he's starting controversies, and it just shows how relevant he wants to be at any given time. And I just think LeBron being in the spotlight again and being in the finals has kind of been eating away at him. And I kind of feel like this is where that kind of came from. So,
yeah. And I want to just lead off, Austin, by saying that a lot of what you said about Kyrie, I largely agree with, but I'm going to be kind of counter to what you just said. And just to kind of let the you know, the viewers and the listeners know, you know, this is the gossip column. This is new. We just so happen to kind of disagree slightly on this, and it's not like we're trying to be like First Take where we have to disagree with each other. You know, like it's not like that at all. But I do want to say that I don't know that this is obviously a shot at LeBron, but when Kyrie says something like this is the first time, obviously that's like LeBron falls under that umbrella, right? But I don't look at it as an insult to another player, right? Like, I look at it as a boost to chemistry on his current team, which is something that almost every NBA player does. You know what I mean? Like, LeBron did it for the Lakers. He built up his team. And it's something that even you, Austin, you just criticize Kyrie for his team chemistry and all this other stuff. I think that this is him trying to do that the best way that he knows how. Is he doing it the best way possible? Probably not. Like, you probably clean up the language a little bit, right? Not just talking about the MFer part, but like, you know, thinking about what it means when you actually say these words. Because the dude is an intelligent guy to some extent. I'll say he's educated. I'm not going to say he's intelligent, but he's educated. I think that, though, this was a boost to chemistry, which, again, you know, almost any player does. And I think it's real easy too for us, you know, as people who want to talk about the NBA and talk about these gossip columns, as you so appropriately named. It's always easy to tie a conversation back to LeBron James. It happens all the time. You could have a conversation that has nothing to do with him, and he's going to get brought into it somehow.
You see it on social media 100 times a day. You can post something in a group about the NBA that is about the Charlotte Hornets, and somehow LeBron
James is
the number one thing that they're talking about. It's ridiculous.
This is something like LeBron James is like the most winningest player against the Bobcats or the Hornets, whatever they are at the time, right? So it's easy to do that because, one, it's an easy draw. It's low-hanging fruit. The casual person who doesn't even watch the NBA knows who LeBron James is. So when you mention LeBron James, it's going to be looked at least. It's at least going to be looked at, right? And he's also, like we mentioned earlier, one of the most polarizing players to ever play. People either think that he walks on water or he can never do anything right, you know? So I think it's easy to tie that back to him. I don't really care so much about Kyrie's comments in this interview when he says this is the first time in my career that I can look at a player and say, hey, that dude can shoot too. Not score, can shoot too. And there's a distinction between scoring and shooting, and we could talk about that later. My biggest concern, however, is Kyrie trying to become some like artistic philosopher by saying something like, I don't really look at us as having an NBA head coach. Really? Like, you don't look at the fact that that the guy who got hired and endorsed you as one of the best playmakers in NBA history, Steve Nash, who has 0 NBA head coaching experience, mind you, like, this is the last thing that your first or second best player needs to be saying about an NBA head coach with no experience, immediately following the dissection that he received by getting probably the most sought after job with the least amount of experience. And then your first or second best player comes out and says, I don't really look at us as having a head coach. Like, KD could coach, I can coach. Nash, sure, if he wants to, I guess at times could draw up a play or two. Mind you, he's one of the best basketball minds on the floor that we've seen in recent memory, right? So again, I know that Kyrie views himself as like, you know, Socrates or Aristotle, you know, whoever you want. Like, he's the smartest guy that he knows. Just ask him, right? I don't, again, when he talks about trying to build his team up and say like, hey, KD, I can look at you and be like, this dude can shoot too. Like, you're supposed to say stuff like that about your teammate. You are not supposed to say, I don't look at us as having an NBA head coach, especially when your team just brought on a guy with no NBA head coaching experience. Poor form. Like, that is
arguably the biggest hire of the offseason, you know, of the whole entire coaching carousel or whatever you want to call it. You know, like you said, it is a pretty sought after job. It may or may not be the most sought after job in the NBA that's open, but it's up there. You know, anybody would want a chance to coach those guys
because it's almost impossible to fail. It's almost impossible to fail. And you bring in a guy with no experience. It's like when Steve Kerr got brought into Golden State. Like, really? Like, you expected Steve Kerr to do bad? Look at what happened with Luke Walton. That dude is like the sorriest coach in the NBA right now.
I was still going to say he's got players that won't even talk to him on his team right now.
Exactly. And now Steve Nash is going to be basically the same thing, just on the East Coast, right? Like, it's going to be impossible to fail with Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant and company, right? They have a good roster.
Right. I mean, it depends on your definition of failure. They're obviously not going to be a bad team. They're obviously going to make the playoffs and contend. But with the roster they have, is it championship or bust? Is the only real question about that.
Well, when Kyrie is making comments like this dude is the best shooter in the world in Kevin Durant, which he might be, and then, you know, saying stuff like, I'm the coach, like, you're putting more arrows on or targets on your back. Like, I'm going to be coaching the team. Okay. Like, if you want all the criticism, go ahead, Kyrie.
Right.
Like, you're making it harder for yourself.
I just feel like the whole entire thing just is bulletin board material for opponents that are the last person. Like, LeBron's the last person in the world that needs bulletin board material. But, you know, why put something out in the media that's that specific about, you know, every teammate I've ever had before this guy can't make that shot? Or, you know, he didn't say that, but, you know, that's what he meant. And, you know,
or maybe he didn't, but you leave ambiguity for our minds to get as wide ranging as we want.
Exactly. And like you said, it's always going to come back to LeBron if he has anything to do with it at all. And
if there is any room for LeBron James to get mentioned in a conversation, especially from a former teammate, like, it's going to happen. Like, we still talk about Shaq and Kobe, you know, and unfortunately Kobe Bryant has passed away and Shaq has long since been retired. And we still talk about the beef that they had between each other because it's fun to talk about players not liking each other or not getting along.
The only thing that is probably just as popular or more popular than the actual product on the court is all of the what ifs surrounding everything. It's all the possible trades and where's this guy going to go and where's this guy going to go and who said what. It's all
the best to almost do it. Yeah.
And I just feel like, it's great. If you're trying to build chemistry with your teammates, it's a weird time to do it now when your team's been out of things for a while. He's the first game of the finals. It's just, but I mean, I'm sure he would have opportunities at any time, any day of the week to say that kind of stuff. And it was just, I think it was very, very meticulous in how he did it, when he did it. And I just think it's very calculated. I almost kind of see him and LeBron, kind of the reason they didn't really get along was they're very, very alike in terms of like their mentally, the way they think about things. I think Kyrie and LeBron both think that, hey, we're going to do this my way and I'm the best. I can do this, and LeBron's obviously a little bit more of a dominant personality in that aspect because he has championships and has experience. And so I think
Kyrie.
Right. And that's why I think maybe Kyrie kind of bristled at the way LeBron treats his teammates. And especially when he was in Cleveland, it was obviously LeBron's team. He was the leader. He was kind of unquestioned. And I don't know if that sat well with Kyrie. So I kind of think that the same way that LeBron went out and said when he beat Golden State that made him the best ever, I think Kyrie kind of has a little bit of that in him too. And I kind of agree with what you said. I think he just kind of goes about it the wrong way sometimes, and he maybe doesn't mean to. But at the end of the day,
you're leaving it open for us to make it. Even though, like we forget too that he did call LeBron and was like, "Hey, bro, like I kind of see like what you were dealing with in Cleveland when he was in Boston. He called LeBron and was like, "Hey, man, I feel you. Like I understand what you went through when I was in Cleveland." So like. I don't think that like they hate I genuinely don't think that they do. I just think that it was the first time, like I mentioned, since, Shaq and Kobe that we had saw like the young guy want to have his, own team. You know what I mean? Right. So.
And people forget that about Kobe Bryant. I know he's passed away and I don't want to be disrespectful, but people act like Kobe Bryant was like this saint that was just sent down from heaven to be like the basketball god. And he was a hard guy to get along with for a long time. And growing up as a Lakers fan, I'm going to be completely honest with you. It was probably the last 2 years of his career before I really, really started to like Kobe Bryant. I struggled
as a person, not as a basketball.
Exactly.
Talent, right?
Exactly. I felt like he kind of was the reason a lot of guys didn't come to the Lakers. He kind of,
he could have been the reason that Dwight Howard got broken.
Right. Exactly.
People don't talk about that.
It's kind of the same thing that Michael Jordan did. And Michael Jordan obviously was really wildly successful with it. Not everybody gets your teammates so pissed off that they punch you in the face in practice. And that usually isn't a good thing. But for somehow with Jordan, that worked out. And
it's that psychopath mentality that we were
not everybody in the NBA can handle Kobe Bryant calling him soft and making fun of him in the media. I mean, I remember when he was talking about that year we averaged 35 points per game. I mean, he just ripped every former teammate he had. And some guys react to that well. Some guys take that as helps them light a fire.
From Jordan. Yeah.
But some guys, it just doesn't work. Some guys can't take that kind of criticism, especially not publicly. Like, who wants to be called out in the media for anything? It's probably not a really good feeling.
Yeah, and you get told to leave that stuff in the locker room all the time, right? Unless you're one of the best to ever do it, then you can do whatever it is that you want, which is what Kobe was, one of the best to ever do it.
And if you are a legitimate superstar, which I think at any given season there's maybe 5, maybe 7. 7 would be pushing it for me, but there's very few guys that have that ability to kind of get away with that stuff. And Kobe was one of them. You're right, and LeBron's one of them, but Kyrie's not.
He's not,
and I don't know if I don't think he ever will be.
I don't either.
He's a great point guard. He's a great scorer. Obviously, in the finals, the year Cleveland won, he was terrific. He was one of the best, second options that LeBron's had. He's had a lot of good ones. But I just don't think he thinks about the ramifications of everything he says. And if he does, then he's just a troll, I guess.
Well, he's got that same mentality about himself that you just likened him and LeBron together, right? Like you said that he's got the same mentality. He just doesn't have the results. Like we mentioned, you kind of have to be like that psychopath, right? You got to kind of be narcissistic in a way where you got to think that like like I said, he's the smartest guy that he knows. Just ask him. Like you have to be that way to be the best. It never looks good when you're not the best.
Right. I mean, Jimmy Butler a couple of years ago, people were really hard on him for what he did in Minnesota, and he kind of almost broke Karl Anthony Towns a little bit in the same aspect as what we were just talking about. And now look at him; he's with a group of guys that, like, they talk about that Heat culture. It just fits his
crazy
personality better. Exactly. They all go in there, and all they care about is winning.
Tyler Hero, as a rookie, has like some of the biggest cojones in the NBA.
I heard somebody say on NBA radio the other day that the Nuggets, when the Lakers played the Nuggets are kind of cute and cuddly. The Miami Heat are the last thing you would ever call cute and cuddly. They're a bunch of killers that want to go out there and they'll do whatever they can to beat you. I just think they're overmatched in this series. But that's not for everybody. But
it's not.
It is also tend to be pretty successful in the past. Usually the teams that win are the teams that have one of those alpha dogs, one of those 5 guys that are a legitimate superstar. You get the occasional, Mavericks in 2011 with Dirk, but there's not nearly as many of those as there are the other way.
There's really not. Those are the exception, not the rule, right?
Right. And my only real argument with it is if, like we said, most of the NBA players or those high level talents are psychopaths like that, why don't we hear this kind of stuff from more of them? I just think he doesn't have tact, I guess, in the way he goes about it.
No, absolutely. And that's what I'm saying. Like he does crave attention. Like this is attention seeking behavior. I'm not going to argue that. That's why I said earlier, like, I don't disagree with a lot of what you said. I just felt like that the part that you were hard on him for really was about trying to build chemistry, which this is kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't thing for him, right? Because here he is building up Kevin Durant. Like everyone's looking at it like he's tearing down LeBron James. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. But he's building, we know for a fact that he is building up Kevin Durant. He is working on team chemistry. And, damned if you do, Kyrie Irving, because all we're going to talk about is who you're tearing down in this comment, not who you're building up.
Right.
My biggest issue with that entire interview was like, you're an NBA coach with 0 experience. You're going to say in an interview that you don't look at him as your head coach. Like, that's troublesome.
Right. That's probably the more controversial statement. But it gets completely buried because the other one everybody thinks is in reference to LeBron.
Because anytime we could talk about LeBron James, that we're going to.
Exactly. And doesn't ESPN have like a contract that they have to mention his name like 10 times an hour or something?
I don't know. Probably.
It seems like it. All right, I want to get on to this next one.
Let's roll
into one. I kind of want to put my my tinfoil hat on for it's a little bit
I saw that, yeah.
More conspiracy than anything.
Mm-hmm.
So Daniel House Jr. earlier this playoffs was kicked out of the bubble and
of the Houston Rockets for anybody who's unfamiliar.
Yep. For having an unauthorized female guest in his hotel room overnight. Take that and run with it however you want. When we're pretty sure everybody that's if you're an adult, what was going on.
I have 4 kids. I have a good idea.
A lot of holes in this story. I've been to Disney. I don't know if you have, but
I have
been to Disney. The Disney hotels, there's cameras everywhere.
Correct.
There's cameras in every hallway of every hotel. Why weren't they on? They have no camera footage of this woman being in the hotel at all. They have no cameras going on. I mean, maybe the Rockets asked to have the cameras turned off. Who knows? Maybe everybody in the bubbles having unauthorized guests and they're just trying to hide it. I don't know. I don't think so.
Lou Williams gonna go out and get his own guests,
Right? Exactly. And he didn't get too much trouble. But if she was a testing official, like they said she was, why was she not authorized to be in the hotel? If she's administering the tests, wouldn't that mean if they have to stay in the bubble and she's administering tests, that she's already in the bubble? So
I would venture to say that the term that they use is unauthorized guest. Not that she wasn't an authorized staff member, right? But she wasn't authorized to be, basically giving conjugal visits. You know what I mean?
And if that's the case, why does the NBA care about that? I don't know that that's really a thing that they should worry about. If she's allowed to be in the bubble, they should kind of be allowed to go anywhere, I feel like. Now, Daniel House Jr. is married with kids, so that looks bad. But that's where we get to kind of my conspiracy theory part of this. Like I said, the cameras weren't on. She was interviewed about her whole entire time there. She did admit to being there, so we know she was there.
Correct.
But she named Tyson Chandler and another unnamed player is all the reports that have ever come out. But she didn't say that.
Which usually makes you lead to believe that it's probably a big, because consider the names that we do know. We know Tyson Chandler. We know Daniel House. Are there bigger names in Houston?
Definitely.
Okay.
Is there a star in Houston that tends to frequent, gentlemen's clubs and likes that kind of, activity?
And again, not going to judge that, but I mean, just saying, follow the breadcrumbs.
He's an adult and he's a professional. He can do whatever he wants. But Chandler was immediately cleared. She apparently never even named Daniel House Jr. And he was all of a sudden named as the player she visited because they have door data saying that he opened his hotel room door around the time that she arrived at the hotel. I mean,
but they don't have cameras.
Right, because they don't have cameras. That doesn't make sense. I mean, that's a little bit of, circumstantial evidence. Who knows what he was doing? It doesn't look good. And maybe I'm being naive, but I'm not 100% sure that Daniel House was ever the player that she actually visited. It could have been, like we said, one of the bigger names on that roster. It could have been that she wasn't the only one, and it was way worse than we actually heard, and they just scrambled to try to cover it up. But I almost feel like Daniel House Jr. was kind of the fall guy for this whole thing.
Sure.
And it was just interesting. I've been talking about it with some of my friends on social media and at work and stuff a lot. And, you hear all kinds of crazy theories and stuff, but I don't know how crazy this one is. It might be a little bit out there, but I just feel like, they either somebody's story isn't true or they're covering up for something else.
Yeah, I think that your thought about it being bigger than what it is, and just throwing something out there for people to maybe somehow believe that the NBA is on top of it.
Right.
I could see that. I would maybe buy that for 50 cents. Right. But I just want to say first, if there was any doubt at all to unauthorized guests in Orlando, I would rather them be safe than sorry. I think the NBA, if we're judging the rest of the world by the NBA standards, the NBA has been phenomenal in how they've handled this whole Corona, situation. Part of what initially was thought of as Daniel House immediately being left was that he had COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
And if he's seeing a testing official, two things could have happened, right? One, he could have tested positive for COVID-19. She is a woman. Let's just assume that the testing official was a man that stayed overnight. Would that be the first assumption that we go to, that Daniel House and a man was doing inappropriate things? Maybe he was diagnosed with COVID-19, and since that testing official came in contact with them, maybe they were suspect too. And the woman did leave, right? Because she was interviewed and things like that. So maybe she came in contact with someone who was, suspected of having COVID-19. And maybe that's what happened. But because of the fact that it's more forgivable for the NBA to have, for there to be some sort of extramarital affair or something along those lines happening, that's not as scary to the public as a potential spread of COVID-19 in this bubble that everyone's getting high praise about. So
I didn't even think about that aspect of it. That's a really good point.
This is me putting on my tinfoil hat now, right? So I usually don't do conspiracy theories, but I'm just saying, if there was news of an extramarital affair happening with NBA players, something that we kind of hear about. I mean, we talked about how Lou Williams left to go get some lemon pepper wings. You know, it's almost kind of
Tyler Hero brought his girlfriend to the bubble, and her ex-boyfriend is Kyle Kuzma.
Yep. So
it just happens in the NBA.
It just happens in the NBA, right? So is that more forgivable than the public than potentially a leak of COVID-19 happening in this pristine bubble? I don't know. This is me putting on my tinfoil hat. I think that, however, I do think that it probably was something inappropriate. The optics of it obviously play a bigger part in it probably than the actual what had happened was type thing. So maybe this is the NBA trying to somehow police, behavior within the bubble. I mean, Disney is the happiest place on earth. We don't need this type of stuff happening there. This is, where kids go, right? So I don't know. Maybe there's optics to it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think in people trying to tie this into, maybe someone called the hotline on Daniel House, and, he was playing well. We talked about that a lot in the playoffs, how Daniel House was a pretty decent contributor for the Rockets. I don't think that, if you're going to call on somebody, Daniel House is probably the last guy that you should be targeting. So I don't think that this was an effort for the Rockets. Hey, buddy. Okay. I don't think that this is an effort for the Rockets to be sabotaged in a way.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. I feel like, the Rockets would be the team to file a complaint if anybody would. And, we haven't heard anything about that yet. So,
correct.
Maybe it is just as innocent as, well, not innocent, but maybe what they're telling us is the case. And, maybe she did just go visit Daniel House Jr. overnight and they got caught. Who knows? But it's definitely more fun to speculate about, what could have happened. Who knows? Sure. Maybe James Harden was throwing parties in his hotel room and they didn't want everybody to find out. And it would look really bad for the league if there was a leak of COVID, or two, if it was just like rampant unauthorized guests every night or all over with all the different teams. And
basically just passing your room key to the right.
Right. There have been, speculations and reports of that may have been the case. At least I heard with Houston's team. I don't know if they were the only team or if there was any at all, but the league acted pretty quickly to get him out of the bubble and to shut him down. So,
yes.
I feel like it's probably a pretty isolated case, but you never really know. And I just, what really intrigues me is the fact that they don't have the cameras on. You'd think if they're that worried about people getting in and out, they'd have the cameras going and they'd have people,
correct,
monitoring them all the time. It's not like the NBA doesn't have the ability to do that if they need to.
Nor Disney.
Right. They have player tracking stuff on them. So if anybody gets tested positive, they can immediately see who else they came in contact with. So they know where they're at pretty much at all times. It was just interesting to see. And, I don't know if we'll hear any more about it or if he's made any public statements or anything, but I do know his wife seemed like she was pretty unhappy on social media about it. And I don't blame her.
Yeah. I mean, as to be expected, I could imagine that if there were allegations on my end, that my wife would probably not be too pleased either. So that's kind of to be expected.
And it is kind of sad what you said, but it is also true. I mean, we've become so desensitized in terms of the NBA as far as, cheating
and NFL. I mean, both. Yeah.
It is almost more forgivable, at least in terms of how quickly it's going to be out of the news cycle. If Daniel House Jr. was the reason that COVID-19 tore through the NBA bubble, that would never stop being a story. But this just came and went.
Yeah, and also you look at the alternative. You mentioned how sad it is. It is kind of expected. Well, look what D'Angelo Russell went through in Los Angeles when he tried to be counter to that type of behavior, and, to what other people may look at as something like, okay, like he's, whatever. I'm not going to dive into a big, moral episode here, but I'm just saying, like, when people kind of deviate from what is expected, you get traded to the Nets. And
when you're in the spotlight like that, it's a lot different than being you or me. You know what I mean? Like you have to think about those things. And like, I know when I go into my work, I'm expected to do certain things a certain way and act a certain way. It may not be the way I act at home or the way I am with friends, but that's where you have to, you have to be able to draw the line somewhere. And in defense of Daniel House Jr., if it was him and he was guilty of this, I mean, it's not okay to cheat, but regardless, even if he was single and he had an unauthorized guest, it's a long time to be stuck in a hotel room by yourself. Some of these guys have been there for almost 3 months. Yeah, they're with their teammates, but they can't go do anything really. And I'm sure it does take a toll on people. So,
I'm sure it does. And again, not to make this a moral discussion, but that is part of it, right? And then we'll get to the last one that you have here for the gossip column. And this is where, supposedly a Boston writer leaked a fake story that Victor Oladipo and Miles Turner asked out of Indiana. And we started, obviously, when a player asks out of somewhere, it's only natural for us to say, where are they going to go, right? So Possible trade destinations included, a number of teams, but the players and assets that were involved were, Gordon Hayward, Marcus Smart, the Milwaukee first round pick in exchange for Turner and Oladipo. And, Oladipo says everything that any star ever says when they're involved in a scenario like this. Say, no, I'm a Pacer. I love Indiana. Like, they do what Anthony Davis did, the same thing. And I'm sure all you New Orleans Pelicans fans out there would say, yep, you're 100% right. Like, they have to say that. So Oladipo saying that he wants to be in Indiana, that's par for the course. You're supposed to do that stuff. But what did you think about this, Austin, when that a fake story was generated and involved specific assets?
Well, my original thoughts were that, the guy that reported this, he works for The Athletic, he is a kind of a Celtics beat writer, so to speak, for The Athletic. And he's kind of been pushing this idea of trading Gordon Hayward to the Pacers since last year. When he came back from that injury. So that's kind of what made me think that, maybe he didn't have a source and maybe he just leaked this story to kind of drum up views and clicks on his page.
Sure.
And, that wouldn't be the first time it's ever happened, but
nope.
It's very rare that you see somebody being the only guy that reports it as coming from a source and reports it with supposed like evidence backing it up. Usually if that happens, somebody like Shams or Woj has said something about it too. Or it's just a speculation thing. It's like a wish list type of an idea where this is what you would like to see happening.
Yep.
This kind of read more like, there's already been talks about it and whatnot. And I just feel like if that was the case and he was actually the one who leaked the whole story, that's just a bad way to go about things. It doesn't make you look like a credible source. I don't know how you could, if that was true, how you could really believe anything that he reports in the future. And I don't know that it is a good idea. If it is true, maybe you don't want that kind of stuff getting leaked to the media if you're Danny Ainge, and that doesn't really look good that way either. So I'm sure it got him a lot of, publicity for his, the 15 minutes that was a story. But I just feel like it kind of came out of thin air. And being here in Indianapolis, you hear a lot on both sides, people saying, oh, yeah, Oladipo doesn't want to be here. But then you hear other people saying Oladipo loves it here. He's called Indianapolis his city before, and like you said, everybody in sports says, oh, I'm not leaving. And then 10 days later, they're on a new team.
Have to.
I think I was 13 or 14 years old when the first time I realized you can't believe anything any of these guys say, when Nick Saban said that he wasn't leaving LSU or wasn't leaving the Dolphins. And then 2 weeks later, he was the Alabama head coach.
Yep.
And, right then I realized these guys just kind of have to say that for the media.
Have to, or you're going to get eaten every day.
But, I've kind of softened my stance on it since then. And, this is kind of something that's pretty run of the mill in terms of NBA news. There's always, leaked potential trades. Buddy Hield's been in the news a lot lately as somebody that supposedly wants out in Sacramento.
I believe that one, though.
I do too. That one's gotten pretty bad. They said now, I read today that he's not even answering Walton's phone calls anymore. So that's interesting. And, that wouldn't be the first time a player and a coach have had a falling out. But there's not really any ill will here between him and the Pacers. I've heard that he wasn't happy with the way they rehabbed him, and that's why he was rehabbing in Miami, and he has a house in Miami. And, fans are kind of putting their tinfoil hats on saying, well, he seemed pretty buddy with the Heat players in round one.
You kind of have to do that too. You kind of have to pay attention to those things too, with the way that
these guys, outside of maybe Giannis, I feel like a lot of these guys are just kind of friends outside of basketball. A lot of them get along. They all know each other. They all kind of grew up together. I would be the first person, and I think you would agree, to say that Chris Paul and LeBron James would probably kill each other to try to win a game. But in the offseason, they're like buddies, and it didn't used to be that way. And that's kind of changed. I think AAU has a lot to do with that. But like I said, I kind of softened my stance on this a little bit. I see where he's coming from. It was just weird how it came out, and then a few hours later, the same day, they said, "Oh, Miles Turner," and they used the same phrasing. They said, "wants to move on." So it just kind of seemed like these are it's just like fake news, just kind of trying to maybe, like you said before, cause, another narrative that's trying to, like, cause a rift between players to, maybe be able to get a guy like Oladipo or Turner. And, it wouldn't be the end of the world if they really did kind of make that move. Marcus Smart, I think it wouldn't be smart at all to give him up.
No.
And Oladipo, I don't know if he's ever going to be the player he was 2 or 3 years ago before that injury. He was on his way to being like a bona fide star, perennial all-star type of player. And obviously he hasn't had a whole lot of court time since then, but he definitely didn't look anywhere near like the Oladipo of old. So it kind of, like I said, I kind of have gone back and forth on this one. I don't necessarily think it's as huge of a deal as I originally did. Just it caught me off guard, the idea that this one guy who's kind of been pushing this trade scenario for a year and a half is the only one that reported this story. So it just seemed odd.
Yeah, for real. And to me, it's not crazy to think that Oladipo wants out of Indiana, because we've seen guys like Malcolm Brogdon step up, TJ Warren, hello. We've seen a lot of players step up in Indy with Vic out. I don't think that he's a surefire first option on a team anymore. And maybe he still kind of views himself that way. And also we got to pay attention to that he was forced, even though it wasn't specifically by the Indiana Pacers, to basically report to Orlando, where he was giving up around $3 million, I want to say, because he wasn't designated as a team or a team member that wasn't going to Orlando. But then he kind of sort of changed his mind, which kind of understand, because he was injured. Maybe he felt better one day than he did the other, but they had that going on. He's due to get an extension, and he's without one. So that really doesn't sit well with players in the NBA anymore either. What's stranger to me about this whole thing is that a Boston-based reporter, said that he wanted this trade to happen. I don't know how you watch the Boston Celtics and you think getting rid of Marcus Smart is a good idea. I don't know how I definitely buy into the Gordon Hayward and the draft pick, right? And if you're going to get anybody out of Indiana, why is Oladipo the guy that you want to get? You already have a lot of great perimeter talent. What you need is a big, which is why I think that there is some sort of credibility to the theory that you want to bring in a Miles Turner specifically. I think Miles Turner would be great in Boston, kind of do some elbow action. He can stand in the corner and shoot. He's led the league in blocking before. He's not the greatest rebounder, but Boston is more of a team rebounding team anyway. So I buy into the Gordon Hayward the shipping Gordon Hayward out of Boston for a Miles Turner, and shipping out a draft pick as well. I don't believe in getting rid of Marcus Smart, and I certainly don't agree with bringing in Victor Oladipo with all that. And on top of that, for Miles Turner, the whole trying to have him coexist with Sabonis, I don't think is really helping him at all. I think that his value has gone down greatly. I think that if he goes somewhere else, you're going to see him pick up his production, a lot better than you would in Indiana.
Oh yeah, I agree. And I kind of see where Boston would want Turner more than Oladipo. Oladipo doesn't seem like a fit with that roster. They have 3 guys that play similar to him already. And, look how bad they got beat, down low by Miami. Bam Adebayo looked like, a super duper star against them for 5 or 6 games, because
he might be the best center in the NBA. Like, at least
if he's not, he's on his way
next year. Yeah.
But just think about how much better the Celtics would have matched up in that series if they had a Miles Turner.
He probably still would have had, Bam, to his credit, probably still would have done well. Right. But I mean, there's a clear distinction between Daniel Tice and Miles Turner. I mean,
and for as thin up front as the Miami Heat are, as we saw in the game 1 against the Lakers when Bam went out, they make Boston Celtics look like the Houston Rockets in terms of roster size. The Celtics aren't a big team, to say the least.
And that never really gets talked about either.
Right. And no, it doesn't. You're right. And Marcus Smart, I think, is kind of the vocal leader of that whole team. I think he's kind of the heart and soul of that team.
Best blue guy in the NBA, according to me. So.
I think there's 2 kind of schools of thought as to who leads the team. It's either the best player, which is ideal. Like LeBron, he's always, pretty much always been the leader on his team, other than maybe the first year he was with Dwayne Wade. People say Dwayne Wade taught him how to win, whatever that means. But there's the other way is it's the vocal leader or the hardest worker or, the glue guy, like you said, because not every superstar is a vocal leader, and you kind of need one in the locker room. I think that's why Greg Popovich made those comments that Kawhi was never the leader on the Spurs. Even though he was the best player, he doesn't ever talk. So, you can't inspire everybody just by showing them how hard you play. And Correct. Marcus Smart, he took some heat for what he said in the locker room or on the way to the locker room after the game 2 loss against Houston or against Miami, but it kind of worked. They came out and played a lot harder the next game. And, I think he is kind of the motor that makes that team go. They have stars around him that are better than him, but
and by the way, he produces too, you know.
He does. And people forget, he hasn't had to score that much for Boston until really this year. He's kind of picked it up a lot. But, he was one of the leading scorers in the nation in college for more than 1 year. And I kind of felt like his first couple of years, I didn't know if he was being utilized right or if he just wasn't as good as I thought he was, but he's definitely kind of become the player I expected him to be. I think you're not making any gains by replacing him with Oladipo. I just don't see that.
None at all. And they're basically, I think that Smart is better at what he does, but if you were to bring in Oladipo, you're not taking the ball out of Tatum's hand to give it to Oladipo.
Right.
You're not taking the ball out of Brown's hands to give it to Oladipo. So you basically put him in the exact same role as Marcus Smart. You're going to have to pay him more than what you're giving Marcus Smart, who really only makes about $12 million a year, which is a steal, by the way. So you're going to have to pay Oladipo more money to do less than what Smart's giving you, which, I'm not involved in stocks really that much, but that doesn't seem like, a good return on investment to me. But again, I totally see getting rid of Gordon Hayward for Miles Turner. The only thing is that those contracts don't align because Turner gives you roughly $18 to $19 million a year, while Hayward is giving you like $30 million a year, and he has a player option for next year, which he will pick up because he is injury prone. So
I'd be really surprised this offseason if hardly anybody declines a player option, unless they're just, way above and beyond what they're getting paid.
Yeah.
Because, there is a lot of huge player options from that, whenever that year was when the new TV contract came in and all those guys were getting so much money. It was ridiculous. There's a ton of bad contracts because of that now. The NBA put that salary floor in place for the first time that year. So teams couldn't hoard cap space for more than a season.
Yep.
And so you got a guy like Nick Batum making almost $30 million and Gordon Hayward. And who knows, Gordon Hayward may have lived up to it. He was a star in Utah. He was doing good. And then he had that horrible injury. He's not really had a chance to be 100% and see what you've really got in him.
And he's not going to be put in a $30 million a year role in Boston. No matter how good.
He does still have a home. He's from here. So, there is probably a nugget of truth in there.
But then how do him and Tony Buckets coexist on a team then? You know what I mean? So
right. And I don't know. I just, like I said, it seemed weird how the story came out.
100%.
The source that it came from, this guy's kind of been the only person talking about this trade to that extent. But it is just kind of a weird idea all around. I don't know if it makes either team really any better. Like, why would the Pacers do it? Just because Oladipo's going to leave in a year? Like you said, right now he might be as far down as their number 3 option on the whole team.
Could be.
If he wants to leave and if they view him as
because you're got Sabonis too. You got Sabonis, TJ, Tony Buckets, and then Malcolm Brogdon. He could even be their 4th option.
Right. And
very similar to Gordon.
He may never get that explosiveness back. You see that a lot with the injury that he had. It was a bad injury. He hurt himself bad. And so did Gordon Hayward. And I just don't know why the Pacers would. What return are they getting? Marcus Smart they would get, which obviously I think
they would throw a field day for Marcus.
Right. I think any team would be happy to have him.
Correct.
But as far as Gordon Hayward Oladipo swap, you're taking one guy that one team may view as damaged goods and replacing him with another guy that another team views as damaged goods. So, why take a risk on another guy that's kind of in the same boat as the guy you already have?
Yeah, I think that the Pacers would benefit more in that trade because we mentioned the redundancy that Oladipo would bring to the Celtics, but Hayward to the Pacers basically gives them kind of a Boston Celtics vibe where you got a lot of perimeter wing players, which is something that they don't have now. They're kind of junked up in the middle, so it gives them a little bit more versatility in their rotation. So I could see the Pacers wanting that, but
as you can see in these finals, it doesn't ever hurt to have, extra guys, next man up kind of mentality. You need 2 or 3 guys that can kind of play, you need 2 or 3 big guys that can, handle the paint. You need 2 or 3 wing stars that can go out and get you a bucket when you need it. We kind of saw that with Milwaukee. They put Giannis in position to be the main ball handler and the main guy to do everything. And that's almost impossible to do in the playoffs.
No, wholeheartedly agree. And again, wrapping up this, the NBA gossip column, which, great idea by you, by the way, Austin. This goes into what I really appreciate about what you bring to the team. I'm honestly thrilled to have you as a co-host. I'm looking forward to getting back into the swing of things with, getting back to a little bit more of a routine and schedule now that I got the move out of the way. But man, this was a great episode, and me too, man. And it's obviously always an honor and a pleasure to link back up with you here on the show, man. Do you got any work or anything that you want to let the viewers and listeners know about?
I have plenty. I've been kind of doing double duty for a while at Game Changer Sports Network. It's football season's in full swing, so I've been doing 2 or 3 game recaps for NFL games every week. I did a little piece on Billy Donovan. I'm trying to get every Lakers Heat game and recap done for those. So it's a busy time right now. I'm not finding a whole lot of time to do, other projects or like opinion pieces, which are what I really like to do the most. But I've definitely put out a lot of stuff. I am working on something that I'm pretty excited about. It's my top 10 sports movies of all time. It's not out yet, but it's going to be a while before it's done because I'm having trouble getting the list down to 20, let alone 10. So there's a lot of good sports movies, and it's hard to determine what I want to focus on in terms of criteria, because I'm starting to kind of feel like a lot of the movies that I would put up there pretty high maybe just hold like a lot of nostalgia for me because I watched them when I was a kid. Like I personally would put Mighty Ducks in like really high up there, but it's kind of like a kid's movie more than anything.
Kind of campy.
I don't know if you could even compare it to like 42 or some of the other great sports
Glory
movies
Road or Coach Carter.
I've actually never seen Glory Road. That's one of the ones I have to watch.
Well, you can't make a list then, dude.
That's why I'm currently struggling with it because I'm trying to watch the movies that people have recommended that I haven't seen
White
yet.
Man Can't Jump.
Right. That's on there. Like I said, I've got it down to about 30 right now. So we'll see how long it takes, but I'm getting there.
Well, right on. And just for anybody who's interested on my end, with the move, I haven't been able to do much, but I did manage to get a scouting profile out there for Obi Toppin, put in a good amount of work prior to the, evaluation as I've, been covering the NBA draft and, have mock drafts and first and second rounds and, big boards and all that. So I had a lot of research. I'm sorry?
You have him going number 1, don't you?
I do, based off the team need. So I felt like, he would suit the Timberwolves' needs a lot more. There is rumor now that the Sixers are looking to trade.
I was going to say, Doc Rivers said he wants to trade Simmons. Get that number 1 pick.
He just wants another guard that can't shoot. I don't know why. But so I got a piece out there about Obi Toppin, covering his strengths and weaknesses, kind of addressing some concerns that I have, which every prospect in this draft has concerns, unfortunately. Or fortunately, because it gives you more to talk about. But you can go check that out at offtheballnetwork.com. Nice. Just again, real quick, putting a plug out there for our website. Again, we haven't been working that much, but the website is up there. It's breakingthegamepodcast.com. Got a YouTube channel out too for Breaking the Game. go and check out our, work that we have done. It's out there on Apple and, Spotify, all those places where you can get your podcasts and things like that. Go and check those out. Go back and listen to them again, because you can kind of see where we were right on the playoffs and where we were wrong. And some of those things are still holding true now. So it's always cool to go back and review some of the stuff that we had put out.
Have you ever seen the Twitter account? It's like Ice Cold Takes, where they chronicle every media member and like the horrible takes that they've had, like publicly, and like where everybody was wrong all the time. And I was just gonna say it would be kind of cool to eventually get on there at some point, even though it's embarrassing to be wrong, and just be cool to be noticed by them.
Yeah, just to have some sort. All publicity.
I think they have a whole page dedicated to Charles Barkley, I'm pretty sure.
Oh my goodness. Guarantee. Yeah. It's not hard.
No.
But
that's kind of what makes Charles so great, though.
It is. He doesn't know. He can't tell you who the 12th man on every roster is like we could, right? So, he's obviously there for entertainment purposes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but right on.
That show wins awards for a reason.
It sure does. And EJ is pretty pretty good.
Oh, they're all good. Let's be honest. Shaq's the worst one, and Shaq's great.
Yeah, we need to see what we can do about getting Paul Pierce taken off the TV, because
I saw a funny thing about it. Said the 2008 Boston Celtics, and it said Doc Rivers has been fired twice since then.
Yeah,
Paul Pierce is the worst analyst on TV. Kendrick Perkins is the second worst analyst. KG still thinks it's 2008.
Ray
and
Allen hates now. And Ray Allen hates everybody.
Ray Allen hates everyone.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, man, I definitely am glad you're back. I'm excited to get going with this again too. I miss doing this with you a couple times a week. Just feel like I've been overloaded with stuff to talk about, so this was fun to get some of that off my chest and get that.
You got a lot of pent-up aggression that you wanted to just throw at me, huh?
Well, I can't debate this stuff too well with my wife, because she just kind of agrees with me to try to shut me up. So
I feel you. I think that's a widely used tactic by many of our wives, for sure. But this was definitely fun, man. Just to let the viewers and listeners know, we got shows that come out every Monday and Thursday. So, we're going to be recording again on Wednesday. By that point, the final game of the NBA should have already been played. So we're going to get in. I'm sorry?
Right. They play today, right?
They play today. So yeah, the finals, if everything goes according to plan, should be over by our next episode. But that doesn't mean that we're going to be lacking for things to talk about, because the off season is a big love of mine. I love transactions. So we're going to be
where all the action happens, man.
That's right.
By the time you get to the games, you kind of know who's going to be good and who's not. This is the part of the year where it's fun to kind of speculate.
For sure. So be on the lookout for those, because we're probably going to get creative and we're probably going to disagree on a lot of stuff, which is going to make for a great show. But as always, Austin, it's been a pleasure, working with you, recording with you today, man. So happy to be back. Go check out all the great stuff that he has going on the Game Changer Sports Network. On my end, go check out offtheballnetwork.com. There's a lot of great stuff, football included. I know it's football.
Steven, you've done a lot of great work for our website and our YouTube page. So, everybody go check that out. He works really hard at this stuff. He's constantly, putting in work, and you do a great job with all of it. I'm really impressed with everything. I'm excited to get back at it.
Thank you very much, sir. But as for you, the viewers and the listeners, you have been awesome as always. We will catch up with you guys next time. Much love, everybody.
Have a good one.